Welcome to my channel. This channel is dedicated to horror stories. Enjoy watching. The fluorescent lights burst above me as I sat in my cramped office, surrounded by rows of overstuffed files. Another day, another appointment. I glanced at the clock, its hands ticking relentlessly towards the next hour. A soft knock echoed through the room, and I looked up to see my receptionist, Jane, peeking through the half-open door. "Mr. Miller, your 11 o'clock appointment is here," she said, her voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. I nodded, straightening my tie and plastering on a smile before gesturing for Jane to send them in. The door creaked open, revealing a figure standing in the doorway. "Come in, please," I said, motioning towards the chair opposite my desk. The figure stepped forward, revealing a young woman with weary eyes and a guarded expression. She was smaller than I had anticipated, her shoulders hunched as if she carried the weight of the world on them. "Take a seat," I offered, gesturing once more to the chair. "My name is Mr. Miller. What can I do for you today?" She hesitated for a moment before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Grace," she said, her gaze fixed on the floor. "I was told to come here." I nodded, jotting down her name on the pad in front of me. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Sparrow. What brings you to my office?" She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "I've been experiencing some things," she said cryptically, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. I leaned forward, trying to catch her eye. "Can you tell me more about these experiences? It's important for me to understand what you're going through so I can help." Grace hesitated, chewing on her lower lip as if debating whether or not to trust me. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. "I keep hearing things. Whispers in the dark. And there's this presence, like something watching me, waiting." I furrowed my brow, my mind already racing with possible diagnoses. "Have you been experiencing any other symptoms? Insomnia, loss of appetite, anything like that?" She shook her head, her gaze still fixed on the floor. "Just the whispers, and the feeling that something is coming for me." I leaned back in my chair, tapping my pen against the pad in front of me. "Well, Grace, it sounds like you're dealing with some pretty intense anxiety. But don't worry, we're going to get through this together. I'm going to help you figure out what's going on, okay?" She nodded, a faint glimmer of hope flickering in her eyes. "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. Little did I know that this appointment was just the beginning of a journey into darkness, one that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the human mind. After Grace's unsettling appointment, I found myself consumed by thoughts of her case. There was something about her story that didn't quite add up, something lurking beneath the surface that begged to be uncovered. I pored over her file, reading and rereading the notes from our initial session. There had to be a clue, some hint as to what was causing her distress. But the more I searched, the more elusive the answers seemed. Finally, unable to shake the feeling that there was more to Grace's story than met the eye, I decided to pay her a visit. I needed to see her in her own environment, away from the sterile confines of my office. As I drove through the winding streets of Grace's neighborhood, I couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled over me since our first meeting. The houses seemed to loom over me, their windows like eyes watching my every move. When I finally arrived at Grace's house, I hesitated before knocking on the door. What would I find on the other side? Would Grace be there, waiting for me with answers to the questions that had been plaguing me? To my surprise, it was Grace's mother who answered the door, her expression a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone guarded. "I'm Mr. Miller," I explained, offering her a reassuring smile. I'm here to see Grace. I'm her therapist." Her eyes narrowed, as if assessing me for signs of deceit. "Come in," she said finally, stepping aside to let me enter. As I followed her through the house, I couldn't help but notice the faint smell of incense that hung in the air, mingling with the scent of freshly brewed tea. It was a warm, inviting scent, but beneath it lurked an undercurrent of something darker, something that sent a shiver down my spine. When we finally reached "I'm here to see Grace's room," I found her sitting cross-legged on her bed, her eyes fixed on a point in the distance. She looked up as I entered, her expression guarded. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to check in on you," I explained, taking a seat on the edge of her bed. "See how you're doing." Grace nodded, but there was a tension in her shoulders that belied her calm demeanor. "I appreciate that," she said, her gaze flickering towards her mother before returning to me. "But I'm fine, really." I studied her for a moment, trying to gauge the truth behind her words. There was something about her that didn't sit right with me, something that whispered of secrets and shadows. "Well, if you ever need to talk," I said finally, rising to my feet, "you know where to find me." As I left Grace's house and made my way back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. And until I figured out what it was, I knew that Grace's mystery would continue to haunt me. The days passed, each one bringing with it a renewed sense of urgency in Grace's case. Her condition seemed to worsen with each passing session, her eyes haunted by visions only she could see. I knew that if I didn't act soon, Grace would slip further into the darkness that threatened to consume her. As I sat in my office, poring over Grace's file for the umpteenth time, a sense of desperation settled over me. Traditional therapy techniques had yielded little progress, and I knew that if I didn't find a solution soon, Sparrow's fate would be sealed. With a heavy heart, I made a decision. It was a risky move, one that could cost me my career, but I knew it was the only way to save Grace from the demons that tormented her. The next day, I arrived at my office early, my hands trembling as I prepared the necessary equipment. Grace's session was scheduled for later that afternoon, and I knew that I had to act fast if I wanted to have any hope of helping her. As I waited for Grace to arrive, my mind raced with thoughts of what was to come. Would she be willing to go through with it? Would she understand the risks involved? I knew that I was asking a lot of her, but I also knew that it was the only chance she had at finding peace. When Grace finally arrived, her eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion, her shoulders slumped with the weight of the world. I could see the fear in her eyes, but I also saw a glimmer of hope, a flicker of something that told me she was ready to fight. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "what are we going to do today?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "We're going to try something a little different today, Grace," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil raging inside me. "It's called sodium pentothal, and it's going to help us get to the root of what's causing your distress." Grace's eyes widened in surprise, but she nodded, a determined expression settling over her features. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, her voice tinged with determination. I smiled, grateful for her trust in me. "Then let's get started," I said, reaching for the syringe that lay on the table beside me. "This might sting a little, but it's going to help us find the answers we've been searching for." As I administered the drug, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread creeping over me. I knew that what I was doing was risky, but I also knew that it was the only chance Grace had at finding peace. As the drug took effect and Grace's eyes fluttered closed, I found myself praying for a miracle, praying that this would be the breakthrough we so desperately needed. Little did I know, the truth we were about to uncover would change everything. The night was thick with fog as I made my way through the deserted streets towards Sparrow's house. There was something about the mist that seemed to seep into my bones, chilling me to the core. But I couldn't let that stop me. Not when Grace's life was on the line. I arrived at her house just as the fog began to thicken, obscuring everything in its path. The air was heavy with anticipation as I knocked on the door, my heart pounding in my chest. To my surprise, it was Grace who answered, her eyes wide with fear. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," I said urgently, pushing past her into the house. "It's important." Grace hesitated for a moment before closing the door behind me, her expression guarded. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling with fear. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to say. "I think I know what's been happening to you," I said, my voice barely audible over the sound of my own heartbeat. Grace's eyes widened in surprise. "You do?" I nodded, my mind racing with possibilities. "I think it's the mist," I said finally, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. "I think it's been targeting you, feeding on your fears." Grace's breath caught in her throat, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "But why me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I shrugged, my mind still grappling with the implications of my discovery. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I think we can stop it. Together." Grace nodded, determination shining in her eyes. "What do we need to do?" I paused, my mind racing with possibilities. "We need to confront it," I said finally. "Face it head on and show it that we're not afraid." Grace nodded, her resolve firm. "Let's do it," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that still lingered in her eyes. Together, we made our way out into the mist, our hearts pounding in unison as we prepared to face whatever lay ahead. Little did we know that our confrontation with the mist would reveal more than we ever could have imagined, plunging us into a world of darkness and despair from which there would be no escape. As the night pressed on, sleep eluded me like a fleeting ghost. Haunted by the events of the day and the mysteries that still loomed, I tossed and turned in my bed, the weight of Grace's situation heavy on my mind. When sleep finally claimed me, it was not the respite I had hoped for. Instead, I found myself plunged into a world of darkness and despair, haunted by nightmares that twisted and writhed like shadows in the mist. In my dreams, I wandered through a labyrinth of twisted corridors, the walls closing in around me with every step. Whispers echoed in the darkness, their voices like claws scraping against my mind. "Mr. Miller," a voice called out from the darkness, sending a chill down my spine. "You cannot escape." I stumbled forward, my heart pounding in my chest as I searched for the source of the voice. But no matter how fast I ran, it always seemed to be just out of reach. Suddenly, the mist enveloped me, swirling around me like a cloak of darkness. I struggled to breathe, my lungs burning with every gasp for air. "Grace," I called out, my voice lost in the swirling fog. "Where are you?" But there was no answer, only the sound of my own footsteps echoing through the darkness. As the mist closed in around me, I felt a sense of dread, unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling, leaving me stranded in a world of nightmares from which there would be no escape. When I finally awoke, drenched in sweat and gasping for air, I knew that my dreams were not just figments of my imagination. They were a warning, a glimpse into the darkness that threatened to consume us all. I stumbled out of bed, my heart still racing with fear. I had to find Grace, had to warn her before it was too late. But as I made my way to her house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap, that the mist was waiting for me, ready to claim me as its next victim. "Mr. Millers," a voice whispered in the darkness, sending a shiver down my spine. "You cannot escape." But I refused to give in to the fear that threatened to consume me. I had to find Grace, had to face the darkness head on, and put an end to the nightmares once and for all. The morning sun rose like a beacon of hope, casting its golden light over the sleepy town. But for me, There was no relief in its warmth, only the relentless tick of the clock as time slipped away. I sat in my office, surrounded by a sea of paperwork, my mind racing with worry. Grace's safety weighed heavily on me, a burden I could not shake. "We need to find her," I said urgently, turning to Jane, my voice laced with desperation. "We can't waste any more time." Jane nodded, her expression grave. "I'll do everything I can," she promised, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she searched for any sign of Sparrow's whereabouts. But as the minutes turned to hours, and still there was no sign of her, my fear grew with each passing moment. The mist was closing in around us, its tendrils reaching out like fingers of darkness, ready to claim its next victim. "We have to do something," I said, pacing the length of my office, my mind racing with possibilities. "We can't just sit here and wait for it to be too late." Jane nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "I'll call the authorities," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that lingered in the air. "We'll find her, Mr. Miller, I promise." But even as Jane made the call, I knew that time was running out. The mist was closing in around us, its presence growing stronger with each passing moment. "We have to find her," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "before it's too late." And so, with the weight of the world on our shoulders, we set out into the mist, our hearts pounding with fear as we raced against time to find Sparrow before it was too late. The mist hung heavy in the air as Grace and I stood on the edge of the forest, our breaths mingling with the fog as we prepared to face the darkness head-on. It was a moment of reckoning, a test of our will and determination. "We have to do this," I said, my voice steady despite the fear that churned in the pit of my stomach. "We have to confront the mist and put an end to its reign of terror." Grace nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "I'm ready," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I won't let it control me anymore." Together, we made a pact, a vow to stand united against the darkness that threatened to consume us. We clasped hands, our fingers intertwined like a lifeline as we stepped forward into the mist, our hearts pounding with fear and anticipation. As we ventured deeper into the forest, the mist thickened around us, its tendrils reaching out like claws to drag us into the abyss. But we pressed on, our resolve unyielding as we faced the darkness head-on. "We can't let it win," I said, my voice echoing through the fog. "We have to fight back, no matter what it takes." Grace nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "I won't let it take me," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "Not without a fight." And so, with our hearts set ablaze with determination, we ventured deeper into the heart of the forest, ready to confront the darkness and reclaim our lives from its grasp. Little did we know that our journey into the mist would reveal more than we ever could have imagined, plunging us into a world of darkness and despair from which there would be no escape. The forest loomed around us like a fortress of shadows, the mist swirling through the trees like a malevolent spirit. Grace and I pressed on, our footsteps muffled by the damp earth beneath our feet. As we ventured deeper into the heart of the forest, the tension hung heavy in the air, a palpable presence that seemed to suffocate us with each passing moment. "We're getting close," I said, my voice barely audible over the sound of our labored breathing. "I can feel it." Grace nodded, her eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. "We have to be prepared for anything," she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. But no matter how much we tried to steel ourselves for what lay ahead, nothing could have prepared us for the horror that awaited us. Suddenly, out of the darkness, a figure emerged, its form shrouded in mist. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, a twisted amalgamation of darkness and despair that seemed to defy all logic. Grace gasped, her hand reaching out to clutch mine as we stood frozen in fear. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice trembling with terror. I shook my head, my mind reeling with disbelief. I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. But we can't let it stop us. We have to keep moving. As we pressed on, the figure drew closer, its presence growing stronger with each passing moment. It was as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling before our eyes, leaving us stranded in a world of nightmares from which there would be no escape. But despite the fear that gnawed at our hearts, we refused to back down. Together, Grace and me stood united against the darkness, ready to face whatever lay ahead with unwavering resolve. And as the figure loomed before us, its eyes blazing with malevolent intent, we knew that the battle for our lives had only just begun. But no matter what horrors awaited us in the darkness, we would face them together, united in our determination to reclaim our lives from the clutches of the mist. The forest around us seemed to pulse with an ominous energy as Sparrow and I stood on the precipice of the unknown. The mist thickened, swirling around us like a sinister cloak, as if the very air itself was alive with malice. We have to confront it, I said, my voice echoing through the darkness. We can't let it control us any longer. Grace nodded, her eyes shining with determination. I'm with you, she said, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her heart. We'll face this together. With our resolve set, we plunged deeper into the heart of the forest, our footsteps echoing through the dense undergrowth. The mist grew thicker with each step, obscuring our vision and filling the air with a suffocating sense of dread. But we pressed on, guided by an unshakable determination to reclaim our lives from the darkness that threatened to consume us. As we ventured deeper into the heart of the forest, the darkness seemed to coalesce before us, taking shape in the form of a towering figure wreathed in shadow. Grace gasped, her hand reaching out to clutch mine as we stood face to face with the embodiment of our nightmares. What is that? She whispered, her voice trembling with fear. I shook my head, my mind racing with uncertainty. I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. But we can't let it defeat us. We have to stand strong. With a shared nod of understanding, Grace and I stepped forward, our hearts pounding with determination as we prepared to face the darkness head-on. As we drew closer to the towering figure, its eyes blazed with malevolent intent, casting a sickly glow over the surrounding forest. But despite the fear that gnawed at our hearts, we stood tall, ready to confront the darkness and reclaim our lives from its grasp. And as we prepared to do battle with the embodiment of our nightmares, we knew that no matter what horrors awaited us in the darkness, we would face them together, united in our determination to emerge victorious. The air crackled with tension as Grace and I ventured deeper into the heart of the forest, our footsteps echoing through the dense undergrowth. The mist hung heavy around us, obscuring our vision and filling the air with an eerie stillness. We're almost there, I said, my voice barely audible over the sound of our labored breathing. We can't turn back now. Grace nodded, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. I'm ready, she said, her voice filled with determination. Whatever awaits us, we'll face it together. With our resolve set, we pressed on, our hearts pounding with anticipation as we stepped into the unknown. As we ventured deeper into the heart of the forest, the mist seemed to grow thicker, wrapping around us like a shroud and obscuring our surroundings. But despite the oppressive darkness that surrounded us, we refused to be deterred. With each step forward, we drew closer to our goal, driven by an unshakable determination to confront the source of our nightmares. Suddenly, the mist parted before us, revealing a clearing bathed in an otherworldly light. At its center stood a towering figure, its form wreathed in shadow, and its eyes blazing with malevolent intent. Grace gasped, her hand reaching out to clutch mine as we stood face to face with the embodiment of our nightmares. What is that? She whispered, her voice trembling with fear. I shook my head, my mind racing with uncertainty. I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. But we can't let it defeat us. We have to stand strong. With a shared nod of understanding, Grace and me stepped forward, our hearts pounding with determination as we prepared to confront the darkness once and for all. As we drew closer to the towering figure, its presence seemed to loom larger with each passing moment, filling the clearing with an oppressive sense of dread. But despite the fear that gnawed at our hearts, we stood tall, ready to face whatever lay ahead with unwavering resolve. And as we prepared to do battle with the embodiment of our nightmares, we knew that no matter what horrors awaited us in the darkness, we would face them together, united in our determination to emerge victorious.